The following announcement has been paid for by the New World Order.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. In our last year in gaming episode, we took a look at 1995, a year that changed the industry forever with the arrival of PlayStation. But now, we're moving ahead to 1996, a year that didn't just build on that momentum, it helped define the future of gaming as we know it. So let's set the stage. The year is 1996. In the world, Bill Clinton was re-elected as President of the United States, defeating Bob Dole. The 1996 Summer Olympics in Atlanta was shaken by a tragic bombing that injured over 100 people. And in music, the world was stunned by the loss of Tupac Shakur. At the box office, blockbuster hits were everywhere. Movies like Independence Day, Twister, Mission Impossible, The Nutty Professor, The Rock, and Jerry Maguire dominated theaters. On television, one of the most controversial news channels was launched as Fox News launched on the air, and Dragon Ball Z made its US television debut. Meanwhile, other shows like Third Rock from the Sun, Seventh Heaven, Kenan and Kel, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, and Beast Wars Transformers debuted on television. In music, the Macarena became a worldwide dance craze. Meanwhile, Tupac released his fourth and final album, All Eyes on Me, 8 months before his death. The UK girl group, the Spice Girls, released their debut album Spice. Jay-Z made his debut with Reasonable Doubt, becoming one of the biggest debut albums. In sports, the Dallas Cowboys defeated the Pittsburgh Steelers in Super Bowl 30. The New York Yankees won their first World Series in 18 years. And Michael Jordan led the Chicago Bulls back to dominance in the NBA Finals. Meanwhile, in wrestling, Hulk Hogan shocked the world by turning heel and forming the legendary New World Order. 1996 was another good year for the gaming industry. Nintendo finally entered the next-gen console market after a year-long delay with the Nintendo 64. Meanwhile, PlayStation continued its dominance in the gaming market. Also, other new franchise games were released, including a game from Capcom that defined survival horror. Meanwhile, a leading female character who will become a gaming icon, and a Nintendo title that introduced a phenomenon that will become a pop culture hit. So this is the year in gaming of 1996. 1. Nintendo finally releases the N64. After a year of delays, Nintendo finally stepped into the next generation with the release of the Nintendo 64 in 1996, and it was one of the most anticipated consoles of the decade. Nintendo promised power, and on paper, the N64 delivered. With its 64-bit architecture, it was marketed as being far more powerful than both the PlayStation and the Sega Saturn. But what really made the system stand out wasn't just the graphics, it was how you played. The controller changed everything. Nintendo introduced an all-new design featuring an analog stick, something that was revolutionary at the time. This allowed true 360-degree movement in 3D space. For the first time, players weren't limited to stiff directional inputs. You could move freely, smoothly, and naturally in a fully 3D world. It was a complete game-changer for the industry. Another big advantage? The price. The Nintendo 64 launched at $199, making it $100 cheaper than Sony's PlayStation at the time. That aggressive pricing made it incredibly appealing, especially for families and longtime Nintendo fans. Because of this, the N64 quickly became one of the hottest consoles of 1996, even earning recognition from People magazine as the top new toy of the year. But while the hardware and controller were impressive, there was one game that truly showed what the Nintendo 64 could do. And that's where we head next. 2. Super Mario 64. Mario goes 3D. Of course, you can't launch a Nintendo console without its biggest star, and in 1996, Mario didn't just show up, he changed gaming forever. With the release of Super Mario 64, Mario made his groundbreaking leap into 3D, and it completely redefined what a platformer could be. Gone were the days of simple side-scrolling. Instead, players were dropped into fully explorable 3D worlds where Mario could run, jump, swim, slide, climb, and even fly in ways that had never been possible before. The freedom of movement, combined with the new analog stick on the Nintendo 64, gave players full control like never before. And the gameplay? Revolutionary. Each level was like a sandbox, allowing players to explore, experiment, and complete objectives in multiple ways, all while collecting power stars. It wasn't just a new Mario game, it was the blueprint for 3D platformers for years to come. The story remained classic Mario, rescue Princess Peach from the evil Bowser, but everything else felt brand new. Super Mario 64 went on to win multiple Game of the Year awards in 1996 and is still considered one of the greatest video games ever made. As a launch title, it didn't just sell the Nintendo 64, it proved one thing loud and clear: Mario in 3D wasn't just a success, it was the future of gaming. 3. PlayStation becomes the top-selling console of 1996. 1 year after its global launch, the PlayStation didn't just compete in 1996, it took over. Sony's console continued its rapid rise and officially became the top-selling console of the year, marking a huge shift in the gaming industry. For the first time in years, Nintendo was no longer on top, and that alone told you something big was happening. So what made the PlayStation so special? It came down to two key things: games and presentation. The PlayStation had a growing lineup of titles that appealed to a wider audience, especially older players. Combined with its use of CD-based games, it delivered richer sound, full-motion video, and more detailed experiences compared to cartridge-based systems. And then there was the price. To stay competitive with the Nintendo 64, Sony dropped the PlayStation's price to $199, making it $100 cheaper than before. That move made the console even more accessible, and even harder to ignore. By the end of 1996, the message was clear: Sony had officially arrived. The PlayStation wasn't just a challenger anymore, it was the new king of the gaming market. And from this point on, Sony would become a permanent force in the industry, one that wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. 4. Resident Evil changes survival horror. In 1996, Capcom stepped outside of its comfort zone, away from franchises like Mega Man and Street Fighter, and introduced a brand new IP that would redefine an entire genre. Enter Resident Evil. This wasn't your typical action or sci-fi experience. Instead, Resident Evil created something new: survival horror. Players take control of Chris Redfield or Jill Valentine, members of the STARS unit, as they investigate a mysterious mansion on the outskirts of Raccoon City. But what starts as a routine investigation quickly turns into a nightmare, filled with zombies, mutated creatures, and a dark conspiracy lurking behind it all. What made Resident Evil so different? It wasn't about action, it was about survival. Players had limited ammo, scarce resources, and had to carefully manage every decision. Add in fixed camera angles, eerie music, and slow, tension-filled gameplay, and you had one of the most terrifying experiences ever seen in gaming at the time. The game also drew heavy inspiration from classic horror films like Night of the Living Dead, directed by George A. Romero, bringing that same sense of dread and suspense into an interactive format. Resident Evil became one of the biggest surprise hits of 1996 and didn't just launch a successful franchise, it set the standard for survival horror games for years to come. And just like that, a new genre was born, and gaming would never be the same. 5. Tomb Raider introduces Lara Croft. For years, female characters in video games were mostly side roles, princesses to rescue or supporting characters like Ms. Pac-Man. But in 1996, that completely changed with the arrival of Tomb Raider. This time, the hero wasn't a male protagonist. Players stepped into the boots of Lara Croft, a fearless archaeologist who combined intelligence, athleticism, and combat skills. Exploring ancient tombs, solving complex puzzles, and battling dangerous enemies, Lara brought a whole new style of gameplay that blended platforming with action-adventure elements. Tomb Raider stood out because it wasn't just about jumping from platform to platform. It was about exploration, puzzle solving, and cinematic action in fully 3D environments. Players could climb, dive, shoot, and perform acrobatic moves in ways that felt groundbreaking at the time. And almost overnight, Lara Croft became one of the biggest icons in gaming. She proved that a female character could not only lead a game, but also become the face of a global franchise. Lara's popularity exploded beyond gaming, appearing in comics, merchandise, and becoming a major figure in pop culture. She even helped open the door for future characters and franchises. In many ways, Tomb Raider helped pave the path for modern action-adventure games like Uncharted, Drake's Fortune, and beyond. 1996 didn't just give us another hit game, it gave us a legend. Lara Croft showed the world that video game heroes could look very different, and still lead the industry forward. 6. We all live in a Pokémon world. In 1996, Nintendo introduced a brand new IP on the Game Boy that would grow into one of the biggest franchises in the world: Pocket Monsters Red and Green, known globally as Pokémon. Developed by Game Freak and published by Nintendo, Pokémon was all about becoming a trainer, exploring the world, and capturing creatures known as Pokémon. Players would build a team, battle others, and trade with friends, creating a social experience that was unlike anything else at the time. While the games began in Japan, the franchise truly exploded a few years later when it arrived in the US, led by the anime series Pokémon. That's when the world was introduced to Ash Ketchum and his loyal partner Pikachu. And from there, it became a phenomenon. Pokémon expanded far beyond video games, into trading cards, toys, movies, and more. It quickly became a cultural icon that reached fans of all ages across the globe. What started as a simple Game Boy title turned into a worldwide empire. And as the slogan says, gotta catch 'em all. 7. PlayStation introduces Crash Bandicoot. While Nintendo had Mario and Sega had Sonic the Hedgehog, Sony needed a mascot of its own to represent the PlayStation. And in 1996, they found one. Enter Crash Bandicoot. Developed by Naughty Dog, the game introduced players to Crash Bandicoot, a wild, energetic marsupial created by the evil scientist Dr. Neo Cortex. In the game, players guide Crash through dangerous islands filled with traps, enemies, and obstacles, jumping across platforms, smashing crates, and collecting items along the way. What made Crash Bandicoot stand out was its unique mix of 3D graphics with a more focused, forward-moving gameplay style, giving it a different feel compared to fully open 3D games. And just like that, Sony had its star. Crash Bandicoot quickly became one of the biggest hits on the PlayStation in 1996 and helped define the console's identity during its early years. But Sony didn't stop there. In a bold marketing move, PlayStation even leaned into the rivalry, mocking Nintendo in commercials, much like Sega did back in the early 90s. Crash himself became the face of that attitude, bringing a new edge and personality to the console wars. Sony finally had its answer to Mario, and his name was Crash Bandicoot, a character who would go on to become one of gaming's most. 8. Sega struggles with the Saturn. While Nintendo and Sony were gaining momentum, 1996 told a very different story for Sega. The Sega Saturn, which launched the year before, was already struggling to keep up. One of the biggest issues came from its rushed and surprise early release. Many retailers and developers were caught completely off guard, and that move damaged Sega's relationships almost immediately. As a result, some retailers were hesitant to fully support the Saturn, and third-party developers began shifting their focus elsewhere, especially toward the more successful PlayStation. Sega did try to respond. They dropped the Saturn's price to $199 to stay competitive with the Nintendo 64 and PlayStation, but by that point, the damage had already been done. The system simply didn't have the same level of support, games, or momentum. Then came an even bigger blow. Tom Kalinske, the man who helped Sega rise to prominence during the early 90s with the Sega Genesis, left the company. Kalinske was instrumental in Sega's success during its battle with Nintendo, and without his leadership, Sega lost one of its strongest driving forces. By the end of 1996, the warning signs were clear. Sega was losing ground fast. The struggles of Saturn, combined with internal issues and growing competition, marked the beginning of a difficult decline. While Sega would continue to fight, 1996 showed that the company was no longer leading the industry. It was trying to catch up. And unfortunately, this was just the beginning of the end for the Sega Saturn era. 9. Quake pushes PC gaming forward. While consoles were battling it out in the living room, PC gaming was having a revolution of its own in 1996, and leading that charge was Quake. Developed by id Software, the same team behind Doom, Quake took first-person shooters to the next level. This wasn't just another shooter, it was one of the first games to feature fully 3D environments and character models, setting a brand new standard for graphics and gameplay. Everything in Quake was built in true 3D space, no more sprites pretending to be 3D. This made movement, combat, and level design feel more immersive and realistic than ever before. But that wasn't the only thing that made Quake special. It helped define online multiplayer gaming. Quake popularized online deathmatches, allowing players to compete against each other over the internet or local networks. This laid the foundation for modern competitive gaming and esports as we know it today. It also introduced a strong modding community, giving players the tools to create their own levels, modes, and experiences, something that would become a huge part of PC gaming culture. By the end of 1996, Quake wasn't just a hit, it was a game changer. It proved that PC gaming could innovate just as much, if not more, than consoles. and in many ways, it helped shape the future of first-person shooters for years to come. 10. Duke Nukem 3D brings attitude to shooters. If Quake pushed technology forward, then Duke Nukem 3D brought something else to the table in 1996, personality. Developed by 3D Realms, Duke Nukem 3D stood out in a growing FPS market by giving players a hero who wasn't silent or serious, but loud, over the top, and full of attitude. Players take control of Duke Nukem, a one-man army fighting off an alien invasion on Earth. But what made the game truly unique wasn't just the action, it was how interactive and alive the world felt. Levels were packed with details. You could explore environments filled with secrets, interact with objects like light switches and mirrors, and experience a world that felt more dynamic than most shooters at the time. The gameplay was fast, chaotic, and filled with explosive weapons, but it also leaned heavily into humor, pop culture references, and Duke's unforgettable one-liners. Duke Nukem 3D became one of the most talked about PC games of 1996. It pushed boundaries, sparked controversy, and proved that first-person shooters could have style, attitude, and edge. If Quake showed the future of technology, Duke Nukem 3D showed the future of personality in shooters. And together, they helped define what the FPS genre would become moving forward. 11. The rise of IGN and GameSpot. In 1996, something bigger than just consoles and games was starting to change everything: the rise of the Internet. The World Wide Web, once limited to government and academic use in the 70s and 80s, was finally making its way into homes around the world. And with it came a brand new way to get information, faster than ever before. That same year, two major gaming websites were born, IGN and GameSpot. Before this, gamers relied on magazines like GamePro and Electronic Gaming Monthly for news, reviews, and previews. The problem? That information could take weeks, or even months, to reach readers. But IGN and GameSpot changed the game completely. They delivered news instantly, they gave players up-to-date reviews and previews, and they created a space where gamers could stay constantly connected to the industry. For the first time, gaming news wasn't delayed, it was real-time. This shift didn't just improve how people got their information, it helped shape the future of gaming media itself. Websites would soon become the go-to source for everything gaming, eventually leading to forums, videos, live coverage, and more. 1996 wasn't just a big year for games, it was the beginning of how we experience gaming news today. The internet had arrived, and gaming would never be the same. 12. Madden vs. NFL Game Day, a new football war. The NFL in 1996 was full of big moments. The Green Bay Packers returned to dominance, the Baltimore Ravens made their debut after relocating from Cleveland, and future stars like Ray Lewis and Terrell Owens entered the league. But on the gaming side, something just as important was happening. For the first time ever, EA Sports brought its biggest football franchise to the PlayStation with the release of Madden NFL 97. This was a big deal. A year earlier, EA had cancelled Madden NFL 96 on PlayStation due to development issues. But now, with Madden NFL 97, they finally delivered a true 3D football experience on Sony's console, bringing smoother gameplay, improved visuals, and a new level of realism to the franchise. However, they weren't alone. Sony had already entered the field with its own competitor, NFL Game Day 97, developed by 989 Studios. Building on the previous year's success, NFL Game Day 97 pushed the PlayStation hardware even further and quickly became a fan favorite. And just like that, the rivalry shifted. It was no longer Sega versus EA like in the early 90s. Now, it was Sony versus EA for football video game supremacy. This new competition pushed both franchises to improve year after year, helping shape the future of sports gaming as we know it today. 1996 didn't just bring football to PlayStation, it kicked off a whole new era of competition on the virtual gridiron. 13. Street Fighter Alpha 2 evolves the franchise. In 1996, Capcom took things even further with the release of Street Fighter Alpha 2, a game that brought a whole new meaning to the Street Fighter franchise. Building on the foundation of Street Fighter Alpha, this sequel didn't just improve the formula, it refined it. The biggest addition? The custom combo system. This mechanic allowed players to unleash their own combo strings, giving them more control, creativity, and strategy during fights. It added a deeper level of gameplay that both casual players and competitive fans could appreciate. The game also introduced expanded character roster, including fan favorites and new fighters. Smoother animations and faster gameplay. More balanced mechanics for competitive play. Visually, Street Fighter Alpha 2 continued the bold, anime-inspired art style, making characters like Chun-Li, Ryu, and Akuma stand out more than ever. But more importantly, it showed that fighting games were evolving, not just visually, but mechanically. Street Fighter Alpha 2 proved that even a legendary franchise could innovate and stay ahead of the competition. And in a year packed with groundbreaking games, Capcom once again showed why they were at the top of the fighting game world. 14. Soul Edge brings weapons to 3D fighting. While Namco was already dominating arcades with Tekken, they weren't done innovating. In 1996, they introduced a brand new 3D fighter that changed the formula in a big way, Soul Edge. And this time, it wasn't about fists. It was about weapons. Soul Edge brought a fresh twist to the fighting game genre by focusing on weapon-based combat. Instead of traditional hand-to-hand fighting, players battled using swords, blades, and other weapons, adding a whole new layer of strategy, spacing, and timing. The game featured memorable fighters like Mitsurugi, Nightmare, and Cervantes, each with their own unique fighting styles and weapons. In arcades, Soul Edge quickly became one of the standout 3D fighting games of its time. Its fluid animations, cinematic feel, and weapon-based mechanics made it feel completely different from anything else out there. And it didn't stop there. In 1999, the series evolved into Soul Calibur, a game that would go on to become one of the most critically acclaimed fighting games ever. With Tekken and Soul Edge, Namco proved one thing: they weren't just competing in the 3D fighting space. They were leading it. 15. The decline of the arcade. For decades, from the late 70s through the early 90s, the arcade was the place to be. It was where gamers experienced the latest technology first, lining up at machines, dropping quarters, and chasing high scores. But by 1996, things were starting to change, fast. The arcade scene had already shown signs of decline around 1994, but 1996 was a major turning point. Many arcades, especially those in shopping malls, began shutting down. Rising costs made it harder to maintain machines, and for players, prices were going up, too. What used to cost a quarter now often pushes closer to $1 per play. At the same time, home consoles were catching up. Systems like the PlayStation and Nintendo 64 were now delivering experiences that felt incredibly close to arcade quality. Games like Mortal Kombat 3 on PlayStation brought the same graphics, sound, and gameplay that players once had to visit arcades to experience. And that changed everything. Why spend money on a quarter when you could play nearly the same experience at home? This shift made arcades less essential. What was once a daily or after-school hangout started fading away. The era of crowded arcades, competitive high-score runs, and pizza-fueled gaming nights began to disappear. Arcades didn't vanish completely, they evolved. Places like Dave & Buster's and Chuck E. Cheese kept the spirit alive in a different form. But the classic standalone arcade? That golden age was coming to an end. 1996 marked the moment when gaming truly shifted from public spaces to the home. The arcade had an incredible run, but the future of gaming was now in your living room. 16. Super Mario RPG ends the Super NES with a bang. As the gaming industry moved into the 3D era with the Nintendo 64, Nintendo still had one final masterpiece left for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. In 1996, Nintendo and Square teamed up to release Super Mario RPG: Legend of the Seven Stars, a game that would help the Super NES go out with a bang. This was something completely different for the Mario franchise. Instead of a traditional platformer, the game mixed the world of Mario with role-playing mechanics, including turn-based battles, leveling up, exploration, and a deeper story. It gave players a whole new way to experience the Mushroom Kingdom. The game also introduced fan-favorite characters like Geno and Mallow, while longtime rivals Mario and Bowser actually teamed up to save the world from a new threat. Visually, the game looked incredible for the SNES, using an isometric style that almost gave it a 3D appearance, showing just how far the Super Nintendo had evolved by the end of its lifecycle. Super Mario RPG became one of the final major releases for the SNES and proved that even with newer consoles arriving, the system still had legendary games left to deliver. It was the perfect send-off for one of the greatest consoles of all time. 17. The games of 1996. 1996 wasn't just about the big breakthroughs, it was also packed with a ton of great games across every platform. Even though Nintendo launched the Nintendo 64, they didn't forget about the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. One of the standout releases was Donkey Kong Country 3, Dixie Kong's Double Trouble, which showed that the SNES still had plenty of life left with its detailed graphics and fun gameplay. Over on the PlayStation, the hits kept coming. Games like Wipeout continued to grow in popularity, bringing fast-paced futuristic racing, a unique style, and a soundtrack that defined the PlayStation's edgy identity. And across other platforms and genres, 1996 delivered even more memorable titles, Pilotwings 64 showing off the N64's early capabilities. Star Wars: Shadows of the Empire, expanding the Star Wars universe in gaming. Command & Conquer: Red Alert, dominating the PC strategy scene. Diablo, introducing addictive dungeon-crawling gameplay. Dead or Alive, adding another contender to the fighting genre. What made 1996 so special was the variety. Whether you were into platformers, racing games, shooters, RPGs, or fighting games, there was something for everyone. It wasn't just a year of innovation, it was a year full of games that players are still talking about today. 1996 was truly a groundbreaking year for the video game industry. A year where 3D gaming didn't just emerge, it evolved. Nintendo officially entered the next generation with the Nintendo 64, delivering a new way to play with analog controls and immersive 3D worlds. Meanwhile, the PlayStation continued its incredible momentum, becoming the top-selling console of the year and proving that Sony was here to stay. On the other side, the Sega Saturn struggled to keep up, losing key support and momentum during a critical time in the console war. But beyond the hardware, it was the games that defined 1996. Titles like Super Mario 64, Resident Evil, Pokémon Red and Green, and Tomb Raider didn't just succeed, they changed the industry and set the tone for years to come. By the end of it all, the console war had fully evolved into a three-way battle between Sega, Sony, and Nintendo, each fighting for control of the future of gaming. And this was only the beginning. Because in our next episode, we're heading into 1997, a year that many consider one of the greatest in gaming history. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments. What was your favorite game from 1996? As always, we'll see you next time.